I've done a lot of things on Zoom. I've never danced. Let's do it.
We're talking. Yeah, let's dance. Hey, hello, everybody. This is Yvonne Guibert, and I'm here with Jen Jordan.
Hi, everybody.
And we are coming at you live in Tampa, Florida, at a really cool hotel. And this session, this hour, is What Would David Say? So we're going to talk about some really interesting things. But before we get going, I would like everybody to introduce themselves briefly and how it is that they knew David. So I'm Yvonne Guibert, and I met David for the first time in May of 2014. And we talked about doing this event that eventually would become called the Comp Laude Awards and Gala. So that's how I got to know David. And you go next.
All right. So I'm Jen Jordan. I'm a Medicare secondary payer consultant. Let's call it that. I met David in like 2009. He invited me out to Camarillo to give an all-day continuing ed on Medicare secondary payer issues. And from that point forward, again, I spoke at a million California events. Bob was probably with us. Just became a dear friend. I always admired how free he was with his opinion, and shockingly so sometimes.
All right, Bill Zachary, you go next.
Hi, my name is Bill Zachary. I'm on the board of the State Compensation Insurance Fund, and I was the risk manager for Safeway for 15 years. I probably have the singular distinction of having more pictures of David than anybody else in the industry, probably, maybe even his family. He was always focused on two things to my mind. One was, how do you make it work for the injured worker? And the second piece of what he was focused on was trying to get everybody to understand what the other person was experiencing or doing so that you could walk a bit in their shoes and then through that empathy, figure out how to work together. And those two items really resonated well with me. And so obviously we miss him terribly. His leadership was unique in terms of creating this process, if you will. And so I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, Alan.
Hi, I'm Alan Gurvey. I'm the managing partner of the law firm of Rowan, Gurvey & Wynn. I'm also the host of Gurvey's Law on KBC Radio. And I have so many experiences with David, but I remember the first one. It actually just happened about 100 feet from where I'm sitting today. I was in a deposition with David. It was in 1998, I believe. And we were on a break. We got out of the deposition. He took me aside, and we were friends at the time. So he says, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you something confidentially. I said, no problem. I'll keep it confidential. He said, I have this idea. I have an idea. I want to create a platform that brings all sides in workers' compensation together. All the interest in workers' compensation on one platform. There's a website with education, information, news, a forum to exchange ideas. This is what I really have a passion to do. And I looked at him and I said, David, it'll never work. So what I learned from that is never underestimate David DePaolo. What he created, something that really blew my mind. It was much greater than that deposition and what we were doing at the time. And from that point, I'm the co-chair of education for California Applicant Attorneys Association. So I had David speak on a number of panels, and they were so informative and entertaining.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Thanks for joining us today. And next up, we have Judge Langham joining us from Pensacola, Florida.
Pensacola. Yes, thank you, and welcome, everyone. Sometime in the 2005-2006 timeframe, I heard from David on a cold phone call. He called me about electronic filing and what we were trying to undertake here in Florida, and he and I started exchanging ideas and, oddly enough, trading emails about 3 o'clock in the morning because it turned out we both kind of worked on the same schedule. And so I would get up and read the Work Comp Central stuff, and we would engage in these emails back and forth and phone calls in the middle of the night. And he was just a kindred spirit. So as someone else said, I miss him. I think he was a great leader.
Thank you. And last but not least, Judge Rasp.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the presiding judge of the Los Angeles District Office in Los Angeles, California, with supervising 18 judges and 60 staff. Before that, for 2 years, I was a judge. Before that, for 35 years, I was an applicant's attorney. And I knew David when he was a defense attorney. And one day I remembered, I'll never forget this, when I first met him, he was a defense lawyer. He had a hearing in the Van Nuys Workers' Comp Court. And he brought with him this gizmo thing. And, you know, we had like 12 people at one table just talking to each other before the court opened. And David would go to a corner of the cafeteria and set up something. And I walked up to him one day and said, David, what the hell is that thing? He said, it's called a laptop. No idea what that was. Well, what are you doing with it? Well, I'm trying to figure out a way to write articles and publish them so everybody in the workers' comp community can see them. So like Alan, the same experience, you know, this guy was a pioneer. And right away, I knew I needed to become friends with him. And over the years, we became friends. I was one of the first faculty members when WorkComp Central started an educational program, as Jen had mentioned. In fact, that program that Jen came out to California for, I was on the panel with her on Medicare set-asides. I'll never forget that. It was you know, early in the history of the educational component of WorkComp Central. And then I was honored, and still am honored, to have co-authored a chapter 24 in the American Medical Association Guides to the Evaluation of Causation of Injury, Dr. Melhorn's treatise. And David and I co-authored that. He taught me how to use Google Docs, real-time writing. We wrote the thing at the same time from completely different locations. I think I was in Baltimore and he was in Thousand Oaks when we were writing this thing. So great memories of him, and I miss him dearly.
We all miss David dearly. All right, so a couple of shout outs to folks that are watching. Karen Siebert, thanks for joining. Tammy Boyd, Rosemary from Australia. We have somebody from Australia that is joining us today. So hi, everybody. And Tammy, yes, Bob will be joining us a little bit later. We only had so many slots, so we're going to drop one and add Bob a little bit later. So we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. As I think I've said, we all knew David well. All loved him dearly. He was a prolific writer and a prolific speaker. He went all over the country speaking his writings there, and had many colorful conversations with him about the different writings. And like Jen said, he was quite forthcoming with his opinions and didn't hold back. So what I'm going to ask you next, very briefly, so we can get on with our topics, is why do you think it's important for us to be talking about what would David think about the issues we're going to be talking about today? Just real quick, as succinct as you can. Bill?
Well, I sort of hit that in my preliminary statement, and that is that he was focused in on what doesn't work for the injured worker and how do we make the system work better. And it is always grounding to go back to that question, talk about those issues, and make sure that we're doing whatever we can to make it work well for the injured workers.
All right, Alan, why do you think it's important?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a passionate advocate for the injured worker. And what's amazing about David was the fact that he would advocate for both sides. He weighed the interests of the injured workers' needs with the business interests. And we need so much more in our society today of people who look at issues and are very smart about them without taking sides. He didn't take sides. And that's what I miss so much in everyone that I deal with today, including myself.
Thank you. David, real quick.
The thing I remember most about David is that I said it to him a million times, and every time he told me I was wrong, he would not accept "it can't be done" as an answer.
That's good. Bob?
You know, he had an acute sense of justice. I think that's what everybody is saying here. He really did. He wanted to do what's right, not just for the injured worker, but for everybody involved in these claims nationwide. So he had a vision of that. And, you know, it's hard for all of us who survive him to come up with a similar kind of approach. There's too many stakes. But he had that balance, that sense of justice, as I said.
And Jen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. David was never afraid to speak the truth. He, it was what was right, not necessarily whose side was, stronger. It was what the right thing to do was. And frequently I would read his blog and question his business judgment, because I think he may have offended a subscriber or a advertiser now and again. And I always admired that he wasn't afraid to do that. But he wanted to speak the truth. And he had a very strong sense of what the right thing that we all should be working towards was going to be.
All right, guys, so here we go. We're going to be talking today about some pretty big topics, so we're going to have to do this really fast and hone in on the points. The first thing is we're going to talk about due process in a virtual world. Then we're going to talk about the grand bargain, and we're going to end up with the gig economy. So first up is due process in a virtual world. And let me hang on a second. I'm trying to orient myself with my notes. Okay, so panel, what I'm going to ask you first is, what do you think David would say about judges hearing cases via teleconferencing and video conferencing? Oh, we've got Bob Wilson with us now. Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
So we're all together. Awesome.
I heard all your eloquent statements about what David would say and what David would think. David would not have worn a tie to this session. So
you're absolutely right.
I am honoring David by not wearing a tie today.
Well, very good. Thank you. And he probably would have cracked some jokes about the ones that are wearing a tie.
Are you wearing your fancy shoes?
I have my fancy shoes, but I am not wearing them. I just had a knee replacement. I can barely get my shoes on. So,
Okay, so real quick, since you just joined us, tell everybody who you are and how you knew David.
I'm Bob Wilson. I'm the president and CEO of WorkersCompensation.com. David and I became very friendly competitors over the years. We both wrote blogs. David and I had a very strange connection that we did a lot of the same things. We started online services at the same time. We actually both blogged about our disabled cats on the exact same day without knowing each other had a disabled cat. We both had parents who suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia at the same time. We had a lot of very familiar times. He was a great guy, and as all the comments indicate, sorely missed.
Thank you, Bob Wilson. So I'm going to have to say Judge, Rasp, and Bob, because you guys are both going by Bob. So hopefully I don't get you guys mixed up. But all right, a lot of ground to cover. We're going to start off with due process in a virtual world. So first up, what would David think about judges hearing cases via teleconferencing and video conferencing? So start off with Bill.
I think, again, getting back to the essence of what he was focused in on, and that is the question is, does this work for the injured workers? And for some who have long distances traveled and who are connected, I think he would have been very supportive. And on the other hand, I think, quite frankly, there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have the right internet connections that would allow them facilitate a really efficient meeting. And what he would be upset about would be the fact that if somebody was being required to do that when they really don't have the right connections and things, I think it all gets back to how does it work for the injured worker? How do you get them the right presentation to make their case?
All right, Alan, 1 minute. What's important about what's going on today with due process and all this virtual stuff going on? What would David say about it?
In California here, it's been very controversial in terms of whether or not someone should be required to attend an in-person hearing. There are people who still have a lot of fears and will not do it. And then the administration has said, well, on a trial, you have to come down. So I think he would be most concerned about the procedural protections. He was all about protecting. In fact, I found a quote that he talked about in 2016 when he was considering opt-out plans. He said, what it doesn't require is the plans meet the same procedural protections, and that it is a fault that the opt-out movement took advantage of and which has provided many of the negative anecdotes the media has reported. So I think his state of mind is you really need to protect the injured worker and make sure that if it's going to be in person or remote, that there are alternatives, and those alternatives are addressed to protect both injured worker and the defendant.
Thank you. And Judge Langham, I know you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I can hear him now talking about things being equal and fair, and so I agree with what the other two gentlemen have just said. But it occurred to me as Judge Rasp was speaking at the beginning, I think David would have come up with a solution to this. He would have come up with something like, we're going to ship iPads to these people before their hearing date, or we're gonna find places in their county they can go to and get on a laptop, because his mentality was not about if and what, it was all about how. How are we going to get it done? And I think in an age where we're struggling to have hearings, I think he'd have been right out in front figuring out a way for us to do it and do it fairly.
I think you're right. Okay, Judge Rasp, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know that he would have embraced the necessity of having virtual hearings based on the urgency and the shutdown orders that we had in California on March 18th of 2020. It was shocking to all of us. At the time, 5 years ago, we did have court call. He was familiar with it. Very few of us used it. When we had the shutdown in March of 2020, it became a necessity. And eventually we got the AT&T lines implemented in June. And then we got life-size clouds like Zoom for actual trials. And so I think he would have embraced all of this. And like somebody else said, he would have been the first in line to shame applicants' attorneys' offices to provide a place for the injured workers to be safe and to be able to adequately hear their case and testify in their cases.
Thank you, Judge Rasp. Okay, Bob Wilson, you're up.
I absolutely think David would have supported it for the reasons Judge Rasp just outlined, but I think ongoing, David recognized that workers' comp was a breathing, living vehicle that changed with the times and with society. It evolved. And this is just another evolution. And if he saw it as an advantage that would expand services and ease of access to injured workers, I don't think he would have objected to that at all. Obviously, concerns about fairness, process. How do you get that done? Certainly, he'd be concerned. David Langham is right. Judge Langham, excuse me, is right. David would have had suggestions on how it should be done, because David always had suggestions on how it should be done. He was right most of the time, but I think he would absolutely support it.
All right, I'm going to leave off with Jen and the most provocative question in this little round. But what would David had said about the mandate to wear masks at hearings? What do you think he would have said about that? In certain states, depending on where you are.
I mean, my first reaction is I really don't think Dave would have liked the whole mask thing. He was a people person, not being able to see people's reactions, their expressions. I think he would have taken, that would have been the hardest thing for him. Mm-hmm. So from a hearing standpoint, I think that's significant as well, because, I think something's lost when you really can't see the individuals that are involved in the trials. So I think David would not have been a fan of the masks.
So thumbs up or thumbs down? Do you agree with Jen?
I don't think we could use the language David would use regarding masks in this webinar.
Try to be polite.
Yeah.
All right, I said thumbs up or thumbs down.
That's probably fair.
I agree, Jen. Down on masks.
Let me throw this out though. He would have been the first one that would have said that if the mask makes you feel more comfortable, he would put it on.
But
okay?
I think you have to remember the public health. Now, we don't need to get into the whole discussion of it, but David was really into a utilitarian type approach to things, which is the greatest good for everyone. And if he was convinced that that was going to help everyone, even if he didn't believe he wanted to wear a mask himself, he would make sure that everyone should do it as almost like a Pascal's wager, which is even if it's not doing anything, it's safer for others. So I think I'm going to be a proponent of it.
He would also have the loudest mask in the room, I'm pretty sure.
Definitely, definitely.
With a message on it that, again, we probably can't talk about.
That's right.
It would have been made by
either an explicative or a gesture.
Well, David,
all right, I think I got everybody here. Anybody last words on due process in a virtual world so we can move on?
Yeah, I want to talk about wearing a mask for a second. David would have really deferred to the appeals board, much as we did as judges here. The appeals board is the authority over all of us, you know, in terms of our procedural and substantive law before things go to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. And the appeals board has made it clear that there's case law that says that you can establish the credibility of a witness with even if they're wearing masks. There's just the art of cross-examination is there. That's how you cross-examine people to get their credibility out. And what their facial expressions are is only part of the equation. Their entire body language is more important.
Well, thank you. All right. Any last words on due process in a virtual world? We're going to move on to the grand bargain. I know that he blogged about the grand bargain a lot. And there's a lot to talk about with this topic, so we're not going to be able to cover everything, so we're going to do lightning round with the panel. So I guess the big question is it broken? I think he was asking that question when he was still alive.
5 years ago. Yeah.
5 years ago, and blogged a lot about it, you know, from that perspective. So let's go around real quick. I'm going to go backwards. So Bob Wilson, is it broken?
No, and David would say no. It may be banged and dented a little bit, but he actually did blog about it. He wrote an excellent piece back in 2015, less than a year before his passing, about the grand bargain. Ironically, he wrote about a question that had come up with on a panel that he and I had been on together, I think at the national conference. And what he actually wrote about, and he was right, is that, you know, when the grand bargain was originally formed, and I'll actually quote a little bit right from his blog, what the people on both sides knew at the time was broken bones, amputations, death, and dismemberment. Neither could forecast nor had any appreciation for industrial disease, asbestosis, cumulative trauma, psychiatric injury, opioids, or comorbidity. Nor did they know guidelines, bill review, utilization schedules, medical networks, and other tools where they contemplated. So his point at that time, and I think he was absolutely right, is that the grand bargain isn't broken. It has changed. It has expanded. There are certainly challenges to it. David had very little tolerance for ignorance. And I remember him once railing against some actions that an employer took over, you know, spending thousands fighting a $10 prescription refill. And those type of things that violated the trust and the spirit of the grand bargain. But as he said in that blog, and he was right, is that workers' comp has evolved just as society has evolved. It's not broken. And it's still as essential today as it was more than 100 years ago when it was formed.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, Jen, you're next.
Yeah, the grand bargain isn't the problem. I think what has changed that is the problem are the competing interests in comp today. From a vendor standpoint, from how we spend our money, the pendulum shifts back and forth, but fundamentally the grand bargain is still the backbone. Like, it's the no-fault system. People get the services that they need. They get the wage replacements that they need. It still fundamentally, serves that base purpose. And, from a political standpoint, yeah, we've got some challenges that we could work on. But fundamentally, the grand bargain is still intact.
Okay, Judge Rasp, what are your thoughts?
I think that it's not my thoughts. It's what David would say. And I think what David would say today is that the grand bargain has to evolve with the evolution of our economy. And we're seeing that happen, even going back to 2016, the year he passed. Amazon was emerging as a big employer nationwide. Walmart already was. And so a lot of the online transactions, the huge super warehouses, fulfillment centers. We never knew what that word meant. There was no such thing as a word for fulfillment center. Now it's in the front page of the news with people from some of these employers trying to unionize because of the conditions that they work in. And so the grand bargain is always being renegotiated. And I think either by the legislature, by the unions, or by the stakeholders. And there's always that 5-group competing interests that David was aware of and would talk about in his blogs.
Thank you. All right, so next up we've got Judge Langham. I'm going to twist the question just a little bit, and thank you, Bob, for reminding me that we're talking about what would David say. So David Langham, what would David say about, so we've got 3 chimed in so far on is the grand bargain broken? What will be left of the grand bargain for the next generation of work comp practitioners? Speak to what David would say about that.
Well, I think fundamentally he would be interested in what we mean by the grand bargain. He talked with me several times about this micro-macro analysis. Is it fair as a system, or is it fair in this particular case for this employer and employee? And I think he would continue to argue that as we talk about the evolution of this grand bargain, maybe some definitions would be helpful to us. We had one of those conversations at the National Conversation in Dallas, and that was exactly what he hit me back with. What do you mean by grand bargain? Let's put some meat on the bones and let's have some definitions. And he was very frustrated that it seems like every sentence people throw out grand bargain, and they're all talking about different things. So I think that's where his interest would be, and it would have helped us.
Thank you. And Alan Gurvey, what are your thoughts about what would David say about this topic?
Well, I recall that I put him on a panel in 2016 at the California Applicant Attorney Association Winter Convention, and he directed his comment about this, and he had materials that he quoted from a blog that he had done. And what was really striking was his focus on, again, the employee. And of course, it's coming from my perspective, so it's selective quotes here. He wrote, opt-out proponents need to experience life as an opt-out employee whose life is shattered because the plan doesn't take care of them, regardless of whether it's better or worse than standard workers' compensation system. So he's always thinking about what would be available for the injured worker. He said, I believe an opt-out can work, but only if it's fair and bargained for. And he really focused on bargain. He put bargain in capital letters. He said, having an employer-appointed doctor determine medical and indemnity fate only to be reviewed by an employer-appointed binding arbitrator is perceptually bad. There is no check and balance in that type of system. There is no perceived fairness. It's stacked against the employee. The working class gets stiffed again. So what we take from that is that David is thinking about, yes, there are other options to the standard work comp system, but within the work comp system that we live in, we really need to have that bargain with capital letters, and we need to focus on both sides being equally represented for fairness and justice.
Thank you. You guys have really done your homework. This is awesome. Not that you had to study very hard. Like I said, this group knew David very well. All right, Bill Zachary, what are your thoughts on what would David say about this topic? What would he be saying about the grand bargain and how it's holding up?
I actually think it's been pretty well covered. The fact of the matter is that it has evolved and changed, and I think David was correct in terms of it's important to get the correct definitions. I think Bob talked about the evolution of what it was originally versus what it's become, and David certainly would appreciate the fact that statistically there's been a significant reduction in the overall frequency of injuries and to some extent the severity of injuries, and yet the definitions of injuries has been dramatically changing over the course of time. And I think that there are opportunities for continued focus again. And I think Alan was correct in terms of talking about the fact that you want a process that has due process and is fair. And that's, again, getting back to the essence of what he was about. That's it. And so I think the other panelists covered it pretty well.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to do a shout out to Rosemary. When we were talking about masks, this is a nice thought. I know this panel will remember this person. David would have Dwight Johnson design our face masks.
That was actually my exact same thought when I talked about the Laude mask. They would be a Dwight Johnson creation.
That's a really nice thought. All right, so anything else on the grand bargain before we move on to the gig economy? You guys want to?
Yeah, one thing about this is a question that is raised. What would David say about the presumptions that have emerged since 2016? That kind of, first of all, you have 50 flavors of workers' comp throughout the country. And some states have presumptions for safety members. Some of them have presumptions for overall injuries that are reported but not denied in time. But what would David say about the presumptions that have emerged since 2016? And, you know, I think it kind of unbalances an equation. David was a purist about evidence. I think that comes from his experience as a defense attorney. And that is that, you know, one side has the burden of proof and they shouldn't be helped by a presumption. And then once you're able to prove something by a preponderance of the evidence, then the burden shifts to the opposite side to prove that something doesn't exist. And the presumptions kind of carve away at some of those, the grand bargain, in the sense that maybe they're not part of the grand bargain. The other side of that argument is, and he would raise that in a blog, that it is part of the grand bargain because it was bargained for with the labor union or with the state legislature.
Yeah, but it creates a definite imbalance in many ways. And as I indicated earlier, David had a low tolerance for idiocy. And, if, you know, we're always supposed to follow the science. And some of these presumptions around the country, the science they follow is more political than physical. And I think that he would have an issue with what I've often called as we now have a two-tiered level of injured worker, where you're automatically granted benefits based on your job title, whereas someone who may be in the same room suffering the exact same situation in a catastrophic event gets no benefits because they don't have the appropriate job title. And I don't think David would like that.
I agree.
I was going to say that's an excellent point, because David often would talk about legislatures and their infinite wisdom.
He used different words, but we get what you mean.
I'm not going to use those words, but he wasn't afraid to question the political nature of certain points that, you know, both Bobs brought up, and we can't escape that. That's the world we live in. Everything seems to come down, maybe not everything, but most things, to the politicization of an important issue, and that is true in workers' compensation as well. David would have nothing of that.
I think David would have had an interesting time with COVID. I read that opinion that came out of Illinois last week, and sort of the analysis, like over the top, like let's talk about it ad nauseum, and then ultimately have the presumption apply that he, of course, got exposed at work. So, I mean, I think, you know, part of that evolving conversation, the changing times, the politicized, you know, the presumption, you know, it's not about comp, it's politics. And I don't think David, you know, I don't think he would have remained quiet for long about COVID presumptions.
All right. Any other words on this topic before we move on? No? I think you guys covered it well. And so the next topic we have is the gig economy. Gig economy is a big topic. So there's a lot to cover, but, you know, let me start with, Jim, let me start with you, because you're in Maryland. And so the majority of the conversation generally is like focused on California and New York, as I understand it. What's going on with the gig economy, and what would David be saying about what we're talking about in terms of work comp?
Well, I mean, the gig economy, you know, it exists all over the country, and of course it's special in California. But even like in Maryland, although, you know, we don't have any, you know, the proposition, and we haven't had the legislation, but like even I had a conversation the other day. I got my nails done. My nail guy delivers for DoorDash, and he was in a car accident. So of course I'm having a conversation with him, like, do you have the proper insurance to make a claim? And he laughed at me. He's like, nobody carries that. And I'm like, so like, well, what do you do to keep from being excluded from, you know, filing a claim in your auto? And he's like, well, as soon as the cop shows up to write the report, of course we hide all the food. We know to deny it adamantly that we were on the clock. Sure, I've got a sticker in my window, but I wasn't delivering at the time. Like, they know their way around the system. So we've got individuals that are independent contractors. They're not paying into the system for insurance. They're not paying into the system for comp. They're not covered in all these different ways. So, I mean, even outside of California, where the legislature is actually trying to address it, and people are fighting back, you know, these issues exist all over the country. And you know, I think that, you know, we always like to blame the millennials for being disruptors, but I mean, I think it's significant that our society will come to a point where we're going to have to, you know, make up these deficits. So, like I said, I think California is just interesting. Oh, it's always interesting. I mean, there's not much to avoid that conversation.
All right, so All right, we've got 3 folks on here from California. We've got Alan Gurvey, Bill Zachary, and Judge Robert Rasp. Talk about the issues that are going on with this topic in California. We've got Prop 22, AB 5, which is morphed into a few other things. So what do we need to know about it, and what would David say about what's going on with these issues?
I think Alan should start on this one.
Yeah, he's got the burden of proof.
I also, at the relevant time, had the attorney on the Dynamics case on my radio show, and we talked about that. You know, it comes down to a question of what is employment and how you're defining it. When we look at what David would think, no question, his first thoughts would be, how do we protect people's rights? And it's going to, you know, you have to balance it. And Jennifer made a good point. I think you're directing your questions at what is employment? Why would a gig employee, for instance, get the same safeguards as 40 plus hours a week employee? I think David would look at this and say, maybe there's an alternative system for the gig employees. We shouldn't leave them out in the dark. We shouldn't have them suffer. One of the quotes that I gave earlier talked about, you know, the injured person and their lives being shattered. That's his first thought, focusing on the injured person. But I really don't think that he would go as far as maybe the California courts are trying to do in giving the same rights for a gig employee as a regular employee, even though the system that they have come up with now is different when you're looking at the ABC test versus Borrello and some of the other intricacies in California.
Okay, who wants to go next? Bill, Zachary, or Bob? Go ahead.
I'll take a step because I agree with what Alan said. I think David would want to find a solution for these workers to make sure there was some level of protection. But I don't necessarily think he would agree with everything that California is doing in terms of Prop 22 or AB 5. You know, David's house overlooks a small port, one of the ports in the Los Angeles area, and he probably would like independent truckers to come in and clean out all the crap so they can get all the boats out of his view that are all floating off the coast of California. The rest of us would like you to have independent truckers in your state so we could get our crap for Christmas, but that may not happen. I don't think David, though, would really necessarily appreciate the approaches they've taken, but he would look for a solution or believe there should be a solution that would provide some care. And Bill, I'll defer to Bill, who I know where he's going to go. He and I have been on a panel or two on this regarding the Black Car Fund solution, which may be something that I think David would buy into and support. So, excuse me, Yvonne, Bill?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. I think David would have been sort of intrigued by the Black Car Company thing they have in New York. Right now, the deal is that those limos that take you to and from the airport, there's a small extra charge that goes with every single trip, and one company provides the insurance for each of those trips. So it's a gig process for the drivers, and yet it provides workers' comp coverage. And by the way, they also do eye tests and safety training and a bunch of other things, which helps reduce the exposure for the whole group. I think that's and I believe David would have agreed in this, and this is my opinion. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you have a vacuum, it's very interesting to me just esoterically to have been in the industry for so long and not having employment, non-employment issues as a major question until most recently is a really interesting evolution of the comp system, if you will. But within that, I think there are solutions, and I think as the solutions came forward, he certainly would have provided them. And I don't, you know, there was a discussion of ABC, Borrello, and these other ones, and I still don't think that any of that stuff will completely eliminate the exposure for employment, even though some people believe it will. And I don't think AB 5 really got rid of the employment obligations for employers per se. But the question of employment, non-employment really is going to evolve. And we're just actually, the way the comp system works, we're just early in the process, I think.
Who did not have a chance to go? Bob Rasp.
Well, a couple of points that I think David would look at. I think he would agree with Bill that we're early on in the game in terms of determining how to evaluate employment in this day and age. We also have the advent of PEOs that were just emerging in 2016. And today they are heavy in the logistics industry, the agricultural industry, and a number of others with these temporary employers and these employee referral leasing companies. That's another area altogether where we have difficulties with employment and who has control and who has liability. But more specifically, in looking at the gig economy, the app-based drivers, David would have had his ear to the ground and would have heard that the Supreme Court of Great Britain found that the app-based drivers there are employees. And, it's the same question that I asked my students at Pepperdine Law School last semester is, turn to page 495 in the Blue Book, the one that's over my shoulder, our labor code that we call it. That's got Article 14, Section 4 of the California Constitution. And I said, read the Business and Professions Code that has, it actually is Prop 22, and you tell me whether or not it's constitutional or not. So David would have looked at this academically, like some of us have, and probably would have had a very strong opinion about whether it's going to be found to be constitutional or not. And that is in the process of being litigated from the Superior Court on. We have the Contreras case that just came out that said it is unconstitutional, and it's a stay on it. The judge himself issued a stay. And David would be the first in line to be writing blogs about this case and about the whole picture.
I think you're probably right. And I don't think we heard from Judge Langham.
No, I think what David would have said very early on in this debate is that he was headed up to Silicon Valley, and he would have been advising those folks how to add in exactly what Mr. Zachary's talking about into their apps. And he would probably have helped them write the code or written his own app to have on-demand comp coverage. That's the way he thought. And when Mr. Zachary just said that, the first thing that comes to my mind is this is all solvable. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning. I think David would be throwing out there idea after idea on how we could solve it. And maybe it's not one solution, but he would be a font of ideas. And we need that. We need to have conversations that are not accusatory and angry. And we need to look at answers, not all the questions, and figure out how to make this thing work.
Okay, so everybody got a chance to weigh in. Anything else you have to say about any of the topics we talked about or the gig economy before we move on? Nothing? All right. Well, I can't remember who said it, but when we were getting ready for this session, somebody said to me, the one thing that David would do, that he always did whenever he was talking, wherever he was speaking, is he always made sure to have fun. So I'm going to bring a little fun into the mix, and I'm going to ask you guys to come out of your comfort zone. So I'm going to call on each of you, and I'm going to ask you either to share your favorite David saying, Davidism, that's the word, or your favorite goofy face. Everybody knew that David knew that he liked to do goofy faces, right? So I want you to do your favorite David goofy face impression. One of the two. You pick. So I'm going to call on Bob Wilson first.
It is not happening. I am not doing this. Face is goofy enough. I don't need to try and mimic one of Dave's goofy faces, really. All
right. Well, what about one of your favorite David sayings?
One that I can repeat here. Let me think about it. There is a saying, and I really can't repeat it here. But oh, you're putting me on the spot. Very first one, huh? Now, sure. Now you call me first. Really, that's the. David did like to have fun, and he didn't take. He took a lot of things seriously. Really, he did, but he didn't take himself that seriously, even though he had a lot of serious opinions. I remember one day we were at RIMS. We were exhibiting at RIMS conference in Philadelphia, and David was there exhibiting at RIMS with some of his employees. And we couldn't help but notice there was no one in the booth. There was no one in the booth. They hadn't been there all morning. And some of us went to lunch at the market across the street, the big marketplace. And I ran into David, one of his employees. And I said, David, they've been out sightseeing. They decided to go sightseeing that morning. They thought it was just fun to go out and go sightseeing And I said, "Who's man in your booth?" And he looked at me real close and he goes, "Ghosts." And that was pretty much it. And,
are you talking about San Francisco?
What? No, that was in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Oh, okay.
Rims in Philadelphia. Yeah, it was pretty funny. It was pretty funny. He was out having a good time. They were having a good time.
All right. How about you, Jen? Favorite David saying or goofy face?
I'm really having a hard time, and it really makes me sad. It's been that long. I mean, I have attended countless dinners and had drinks with him and all the staff at WorkComp Central, and I'm seriously struggling. I mean, I remember having a great time, but it's becoming
well, I can tell you, I'm going to do my best shot at doing an impression, and it's not going to look anything like David, but I did spend a lot of time with him the last few years. As you guys have all said, I adored him. He was just a special kind of person. And as you all have said, he never held back in terms of how he's really feeling. And one thing he would do a lot when we would be talking together is like, he'd go like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, and he would roll his eyes back. And anyway, it would be like, "Are you kidding me?" So he did that a lot. Bob, Rasp, what about you?
Yeah, I remember going to a convention for Kaiser Permanente, and my wife was with me. I think we were in Northern California at the time, and David, there was this alcove where this party was, and we kind of hung out there, and David was with us, and my wife's an artist, and so they started talking about art, which is a completely foreign language to me, and they were just animated, and it was just fun to watch David with his drink. He was holding it like this. I'll show you the camera, just with his hand out like that, just 2 fingers. And, the expression on his face was like he was just enjoying himself. The guy was relaxed. He's in a high-pressure position doing what he did with WorkComp Central, making all the different moving parts move together. And it was an opportunity for him to relax and just kind of let his hair down. And it was really a vision I'll never forget. It was wonderful.
Awesome. Judge Langham, I know you're a serious guy. But give us your favorite David saying or, gesture or whatever you think you can share.
I'm not good at impressions, but the saying that keeps coming back to me is that essentially to the effect of that doesn't matter, we can change it. No matter what objection I would throw, well, we can't do this, we can't. He said, that doesn't matter, we can change that. And that just sort of infectious enthusiasm, that's what really sticks with me. He would constantly tell me it doesn't matter, we can change it. And I guess that'll go to my grave.
Thank you. Mr. Gurvey.
Well, I think David forever made me self-conscious about what I'm wearing. It was a convention many years ago that I was at. We're in an exhibit hall, and I saw him probably about 10, 15 feet away. I was wearing some shorts. They were blue shorts, probably the color of the suit I'm wearing, and they had orange stripes through them. They were Puma shorts, and it had a little logo on it, these orange checks on this blue shorts. And I thought nothing of it. I walked up to him. He was wearing, it was like a spandex bicycle short, like very colorful spandex bicycle shorts or something with a t-shirt over it. And I went up to him and I'm thinking, man, that guy's got some guts to be wearing that. And before I said a word, he looked at me and he said, dude, what's up with those shorts? Dude. I was like, my shorts? What the heck are you wearing? It was just, we both had a big laugh and then immediately got into some substantive conversation and forgot about what we were both wearing. But from that point on, whenever I'm at a conference or convention, I'm always thinking, dress appropriately.
Thank you. All right, Bill Zachary, you're last.
Yeah, you know, my interactions with David were basically, I felt like we were both Harry in A Bug's Life looking at the blue light, where we couldn't help ourselves, and we'd start talking, and the next thing you know, we were actually down in the details about what issue was we were working on, etc. And it was all, the consistency that came out of him was the questions he was asking, the intellectual process he brought. But I have a secondary comment I'd like to make about him and his legacy, and that is that this event is so important. And that idea of bringing fun to things is so important. A few years ago, we had the Comp Laude on Halloween. And I got to admit, some of my favorite all-time pictures are Bob Wilson wearing.
I still should have taken first. I'm pretty sure of it. No,
I think you're right on that. But the idea of having fun is part of what he gave to us in this process, and that you carried it through in terms of what we do here has been exceptional. And so that the honor of being involved with something that he started, and his legacy is very, very, I think, important, because we don't always understand when we drop a stone into the middle of the lake, the ripples and the effect that those will have. But he has had significant impact on a lot of people, particularly, I think, on the injured workers and his focus on advocacy. And that is certainly something that we miss, but by honoring him, we keep it alive.
Yvonne, if I could add one more thing to this point, and I definitely second Bill's point to Comp Laude and commend you guys for carrying it on, because it is David's legacy to believe that there's a bigger, better world out there for workers' comp, and that there are people who do the right thing in workers' comp, and to recognize those who rise above and beyond. And I think this speaks largely, David was larger than life, and this kind of speaks to that legacy for him. But I really want to quickly, I've been thinking about it. You went to me first. I was a little off guard. I'd really like to talk about the very first time I had communication with Dave DePaolo and the very last time I had communication with Dave DePaolo. And the first one goes to a story. It sounds negative, but it really isn't. It goes to his ability not to take himself too seriously. I mentioned early on that he and we both launched information websites at really the same time. Work Comp Central and WorkersCompensation.com launched right about the same time. One of the things we'd done, we posted a lot of state information. We found a disability guide that the state of California put out. It was about 80-some page PDF. We took it, posted it on our website. It had hyperlinks in it from the index to different pages. We posted that. I had never met David. I did not know David. But one day I get a cease and desist email from David DePaolo. First time anyone's threatened legal action against me, it was David DePaolo. And telling me telling us that we had taken his document, his proprietary coding, he had coded all those hyperlinks, and he even said in the email, "You even have my mistakes, so I know it's mine." And I sent him an email back, pointed out the state link on the state website where we got that document, that it was a state document. And his response was, "Oh, well, never mind. It looks like the state is the one that ripped me off." And that was the end of it. That was the first time I'd ever communicated with him. The last time I was on a bloggers panel at the California Coalition of Workers' Compensation, July 15th, Friday, 2017. Is that the year?
No, 16.
16.
Yeah.
David and I were on the panel together.
We were on the panel. I was on the panel with you, remember?
That's right. Robert was on the panel.
Yeah.
That's where I told people I knew you before you were honorable. So there you go. I think, David, I had some trouble getting home. I had missed flights, connections delayed. I had real trouble getting home. And I posted that on Facebook. And that Saturday afternoon, David came back and he said, "Hey, Bob, you should have stayed the next day. We would have gone out to Catalina on Mike 47, which was his plane." And just saying, we should have stayed. We could have gone out. We would have a great time. And I told him, my last community was, "Hey, I definitely get you on that on the next time. Next time around, I'll do that." And of course, the very next day, he passed. Yeah. And it was just kind of a sad ending that we never really had that opportunity. He was a great guy. He really was.
The postscript of that was I talked to him after our panel that day. And I said, "David, how did you get here? Did you fly or did you drive?" And he said, "I flew." And I said, did you fly into John Wayne or did you fly someplace else? And he's, no, I don't go to John Wayne Airport. I flew to this, small airstrip that's in Orange County, and I hitched a ride, something like Uber, or he had somebody pick him up and bring him over to the hotel, which is at the Grand Disney Hotel in Disneyland. And so I asked him, do you need a ride back to your car, to your plane? And he said, no, I've already gotten that arranged. And I said, well, it's been good. You know, it's a great panel that we have every year with CCWC. And we'll see you next time. And that was my last talk with him.
Appreciate what you have, because you don't know when it's gone. That's the thing.
That's right. Don't take yourself too seriously. I'm reminded of that on a daily basis from my family and all my friends around me. So thank you for that. And I want to say, I was going to say earlier, and I'll make this brief. We all knew that David loved a lot of things, but the two things he felt the most comfortable doing, of course, he loved being with his family. He adored his family. He was a great family man. And he loved being on his bicycle, and he loved being in his plane. And I feel very fortunate. I know Rosemary's listening, and I know this is probably going to make her tear up. We were fortunate to be able to go take a trip with him to Catalina Island in 2015, the year that Rosemary came from Australia to the event in, I don't remember what was that. I think it was at Burbank. So that's an amazing trip. I've got a video of him bringing that plane right into, if anybody knows Catalina Island, the airstrip goes right up to the edge of the cliff. So when you're approaching the airstrip, it looks like you're going to go right into the cliff. It's very harrowing, especially on a particularly windy day. So one of these days I'll share that video, but amazing memories. Thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on what would David say. Thank you to our listeners for taking this nostalgic walk down memory lane with us. And it's so, I don't know what to say. I have a lot of emotions going on right now. I miss him dearly as well and think about him often. And I know all of you on here, I see people on the chat saying, I miss opening up my email to see a inflammatory comment by David, or, being upset about something. I think we all have those moments where we pick up, go to reach for the phone and wish we could talk to David again. So thank you, panel. This has been special treat. And in just a couple minutes, I'll be on the transition break. So thanks once again to all of you for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Good to see everybody.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, very good.